Hi and welcome to this video. Today we are going to make a few things in our application. If you remember, in the previous video we added a login form and we allow the user to enter their email and register for a new account with a set of two passwords which we compare and see if they are equal. Then we should do something, right? And in this video, we do that something. We are going to create this server-side part using Express. We will get those values from the form, and then we will create a JWT token and send it back to the client for to confirm the authentication and to perform all the operations later on. So let's start. So let's start from creating a server folder. So server folder, and inside this folder I'm going to open the terminal here. So VS Code has a built-in terminal, and I open this using Control Option and the backslash. So you should see the combination. All right, we can open multiple terminals here, one beside the other. So one thing I'm going to use now is I'm going to say cd server, and then I am going to here I'm going to say npm init y. So this is going to create a very simple package.json file. So with this content here, so it's a very basic package.json, and now we can install packages using npm install something. So the first thing I'm going to install, we are going to need a few packages here, and I'm going to install the first one is Express, of course. We are going to be using Apollo server Express. Then we will need bcrypt and JSON web token. So those are all packages we will need to build the application right now. And I know these packages, I know what I need already because I wrote a tutorial on creating an authentication server using this technology. So we are going to follow the exact steps I outline in this tutorial. This tutorial is not yet published. It will be at the end of the month. So we have a little preview here. So we can actually also test that the tutorial works. So yeah, I think I added everything I need. Express Apollo server Express, which is the package we need to run Apollo server using Express. Then bcrypt, JSON web token, and we will also need cors to communicate across. So cors is needed to make two different origins communicate. So we have the front-end application which listens on port 3000. We will have the server listen on another port, and when we make a request using JavaScript, for example fetch or Axios, or also normal XHR request, we need to configure cors. Otherwise, we can only talk to the same origin that served the page, and this is by design, unless this server already set up cross-origin resource sharing, which is what cors means. So the server finished installation of what we need, and we can go here and open an index.js file, and in here we are going to start the application. So the first thing I want to do So let me actually move the tutorial here so you can see. So this is tutorial driven development, which I also do even if I write the tutorials. I follow my own tutorials many times, so because we can't possibly remember everything, right? So the first thing I want to do here is we're going to do the following imports. Const express equals require express, course bcrypt JWT. All right, let me minimize this terminal. So what I want to do now is I want to instantiate the express server. We do so using const app equals express, using that function. And then we need to add some middleware. Middleware are functionalities that are added on top of something. In this case, Express accepts middleware using its app.use function. So we are going to pass course as the first middleware, and we are also going to use another middleware, which is express.url encoded. We need to pass this option, which is extended true. So what does this mean? Basically, when we want to use URL encoded strings, which we're going to use for our login, we need to figure out. So we need to use this middleware, and Express, if we don't add this option, will complain to us. So I just add the option and everything works as expected. Yeah, sometimes, for example, we don't need to know why we Express should need this. Express shouldn't need this actually, but this is how things work. So we're going to use the application we created here, Express, and we're going to call the post method. So this defines a post endpoint. We are going to post the login data to this endpoint, and this will listen on the login route. And when this happens, we are going to call the res. We are going to get a function called whenever this URL is called using the post method, and the function is this. It will accept a pair of rec and res. So this true object represents the request and the response. So we have basically everything we need to find out what the user requests us, and then we can construct the response. So we are going to do two things now. So we are going to extract the email and the password. So they are contained in the request.body, because we already used this parser here, the middleware. So they are in the request.body object, which we can use using object destructuring, email and password. So if you say console.log request.body, you will get an object, and we using this construct here, we are going to get those two variables from the object, those two properties, and assign them to variables inside this scope here. So now we have the email and password in those variables. So right now I need to do something more here. So at the end of the process, we will send the res.send. We will call this method to send a response back to the client, and we're going to send success is true if the success was actually true, or success is false if the login didn't go as expected. So the first thing we want to do is we need to define, like, yes, we are doing a login, but where are we storing our users? So in this first iteration, what I want to do is I just want to have like an object that contains the users, and later on we will add the database, but now I don't want to complicate everything, so we are going to define here on top uh, users object, users array, sorry, which contains a set of objects. So in this case we have one user, the name is test user, but we are not going to use names. So the email, this is the user email, this is the user password, and yeah. So when we call the login endpoint, we are going to check if the email and password correspond to any user we have in our database, and we will check if the password matches, and if so, we will log in the user, we will create a token, JWT token for the session. We will attach it to a cookie. So right now what I want to do is this. So in our application we don't just have a login, we also have registration endpoint. So if register, we will listen on the register endpoint, we will get an email and a password, and also a password confirmation, because yes, we are checking them in the front end already. If you remember here, we're checking that they are the same, but we can't really trust the input coming from the user. We always need to check the inputs also on the server side. This is a rule, and yeah, so we get them here in the register endpoint. So what the register endpoint should do, it should get an email and password set, check the password is the same as the confirmation. We're going to sanitize those inputs, and then we are going to put them into a database, and we will return a JWT token to the user in a cookie. So they will be logged in the application, and finally yeah, they can execute GraphQL requests. So when we will get to the GraphQL part, basically the server will not authenticate using email and password, but the client will send us the JWT token, which represents the fact that we are logged in, we are already authenticated, and we have the permission to execute the things we are going to call using GraphQL. So basically, let me a parenthesis. Basically, those two endpoints are similar, but one is used when the user is already registered, and we don't need to store it into the database. We just need to look it up and see if the password is correct. So here we have our user database, and let's first do the login process, which is simple. It's simpler. We haven't implemented yet in the application, but we will very soon, because otherwise users can only register and not log in again, which would be dumb. Would be great for our users' stats, because we have lots of users registering every day, lots of new users. But anyway, let's go on. I want to, so let's get, where is the server part? Sorry. Okay, here. I want to check if the email and password we get during the login process are found somewhere in the users database, which right now is represented by this object, which has an email and password field. So this long password corresponds to the hash for this string here, secret. And I manually calculated that using another program. So we will get to find out how this is generated. So we're going to find the user in the users database. So the user is users, and we need to find the user in the database, which we do that using the find method. So the find method of the array, you can see so the find method takes a function. So we have a function here, and we get one. So this function is executed for every item in the array, and we get a user. We get a user detail. So let me actually let me change the value of this variable here, because otherwise we will get a problem. We are not getting any problem, sorry, but I have the same variable being used both in outside this function and inside the function. So I want to avoid any kind of issues. So even here I'm going to call the user is. So inside every iteration we get one user, and we need to return true if this is the user we want to look up. So how do we determine this? We need to find out if user.email is equals to our email we have here in the request body. So this basically is like saying if this thing here is true, we're going to return true, otherwise false. So here I wrote this in a slightly different way, as you can see, which is the same, because if we remove the graph here, we have an implicit return. So I can just do this. It looks simpler. Right, so if we don't get any user now, so if we couldn't find any user, it just means that the email that was entered couldn't be found in the database. So there is no user with this email, and we are going to return. So we're not going to execute the part after this, and we are going to send. So we set the status of the HTTP request to 401, which means not found, and we're going to send this object, which contains success false and a message like incorrect credentials. We're not going to inform that we don't have such. Yeah, actually here. So sorry, I was looking up the wrong place. So if the user does not exist, we are sending a 404 not found HTTP response, and we're going to send success false, and the message is could not find account with that email, which is not ideal for like security and privacy purposes, which you should consider right now for our simple example, I think that this can work. And then we want to figure out if so when we are here at line 40, we know the user exists. So we need to check if the password is correct. And we do so using a function which I imported here from the package bcrypt. So bcrypt is a crypto package which allows us to create password hashes and compare them. So basically, if you run the hash function here, which takes a data, a salt, which is a secret, we will get this string here from a non-encrypted and not encrypted string, which is like here, secret. And every time we run this function, we are going to get a different hash, a different value. But so from the hash, we can't go back to the original string. This is by design. But from the original string, we can check if one hash was generated from that string. So, so here, what I'm going to do is call the compare function, which compares so one password with one hash. So basically, we are going to compare the password with what we got from the request body with the user.password property. So if so this will return either true or false, and I store this into a match value. So if we don't have a match, this is what we're going to execute, incorrect credentials. But if we do have a match, we are going to get here. So if the user does not exist or the password is wrong, we are not getting into this place because we get those returns here. And now I'm going to generate the JWT token. So I'm going to use const token equals, use the JWT package which we imported above using the sign method. So the sign method synchronously signs the given payload into a JSON web token string payload. So we are going to pass an object here which contains the email, the user.email, and the user ID, the user.id. From the JSON, so we are storing those here because when the JSON web token is unencrypted, basically not unencrypted, sorry, when the JSON web token so from the JSON web token, we can get those true values even on the front end. So it's not encrypted information. You need to be aware of this. You can store secrets in here. You can store information which you need. And then we are going to define a secret key before we can sign this token. So I'm going to say const secret key. We can enter any string here, and the longer it is and the more complex, the better. So we're going to use a random string. So here we pass this secret key. Cool. So to make things simple now, I'm going to pass the token into the response. And all right. And so what I want to do now is the token is received from the client. Using JavaScript, we will store it into a cookie, and then we will use this token to communicate to GraphQL. But you need to be aware that you need to, so the token must be hidden from JavaScript, because so suppose you get this token and then you store it in a cookie or also in local storage where you want in the client, and then suppose for example that you get a third-party script that somehow gets access to its act. For example, one of the many providers you use, you enter a script in your page, they can read your token and they can execute requests on the user's behalf to your servers. It's as bad as it sounds, and this is not the only possible attack you can have, but the more secure you are, the better. So we later we will store this token in an HTTP only cookie. An HTTP only cookie is not accessible from JavaScript, and we basically store the cookie here in the request. The client does not need to know anything about this JWT token, but it will be stored in the browser. You can see it in the DevTools with the HTTP only flag, and it will be automatically sent to the server upon every GraphQL request we make. So we don't need to worry about that. And no JavaScript can access them. It's by design. So, but that achieving that is more complex than this. So right now we are going to use the simplest possible thing that would make our application work, and then we will enforce the security. So we are going to send the cookie back. All right, the token back. Sorry. So basically we're going to do the same thing more or less with the registration, more or less, because we are actually going to add this user to the database. So until we add a persistent storage, we are going to store the users into this variable, and every time the server reloads, we will lose our user. So just need to be aware of this. We are going to very soon add a persistent database, I think Postgres or something. We will see. So here we get this email password and password confirmation. We are going to I'm going to use the same XSS package from the client. So I'm going to npm install XSS. So I used import in the client because that was the ES module syntax, which we can use in the browser, also thanks to Webpack and Babel in the create React app package. But here in Node.js we can't use ES modules right now. They are under a flag. Soon maybe we can use them. So I must use the CommonJS syntax here, and you can find all the differences between ES modules and CommonJS in my blog. I have an article on that. I have an article for each. Just use the search. So here, what I'm going to say is I'm going to store in, if password is different than password confirmation, I'm going to send a response back which says 500 maybe. So the status is 500. No, 500 is internal server error. 401 unauthorized. Okay. So I can go here and copy the same message. Please enter the same value for both the password fields. Okay, maybe I can also check that those values exist and the password is long enough. Yeah, I need to check everything. So instead of having an alert, we're going to have a set of response.status something and a return. So the application does not go on if there is any of those errors. Please enter an email. please enter a password, and then please enter I don't need this here because we already are checking for this. Please enter a password with at least 8 characters. Okay, we should also validate the email, but we are validating the client side now. You should validate the email if you are going to make this a real application. Okay, fine. So now I'm going to store this into the users. So users. I'm dumb. I don't know how to add item to database JavaScript. Sometimes, yeah, I don't know. Item to array. I don't even know what I'm doing. So I have my own post here, how to append an item to an array in JavaScript, luckily. And it's simple, we need push. Push, yes. Users.push. So we push the object, and we are going to do something similar to this. So we're going to use so the ID of the user. Do we actually need an ID? No, we don't need an ID. So I'm going to remove this. ID is not something we want. I use this also here. We're going to use the email for everything. Okay, so here we get the email, and we're going to pass it. Email is the email we got. Then password. So the password, as I mentioned before, we need to do, we can store the password in plain text in our database, okay? We need to store, so why do I have this? All right, we need this. Okay, thank you. Thank you to VS Code that points me errors. So the password, we need to do something with the bcrypt library. Instead of calling, so here I call the compare function. So we are calling the bcrypt dot, well, I had this here, bcrypt dot hash. So we need to specify a number of rounds. So we get this. Let me see, where was I? Okay, here. We need to use the bcrypt.hash function, which returns a callback. But actually, we are going to use the promise-based API. So we are going to call, we're going to make this function here async. So we can use await in the API. So if you can see here, I use await to have the hash for the password. So what we are storing this hash as the password field, and here, as you can see, we call the bcrypt.hash function. We pass the password, and we pass a rounds object, which I didn't define. So I just add a number here. So basically, the rounds, I define this here better. So rounds. So the bigger this number is, the more secure the hash is, but also the more time it takes to generate it. So 10 is a reasonable number, and yeah, if you need, like, if you're a bank, you're going to use a bigger number, right? Okay, bank. Right, pass this hash. So we should have this user stored in database, and then we send a success message back. But first we need to generate the token, otherwise, you know, the user can't communicate back and needs to log in. So we will not have a separate process for logging in, and so we can simply copy this thing here, but you know what, I'm going to make a function for this. So token is get token, the function is called get token, and I will define it here. Const get token equals function that will return the token, and here we have the secret key, and so we will accept an email as a parameter. So here, so we store the email into the token. Let me go back to the bottom where we define get token, and we pass the user.email. And yeah, so I'm going to copy this thing here. I'm going to use this in my registration process function, and we don't have the user object here, we only have the email, which is fine. Okay, so cool. So we both have a login and a registration endpoint, and we can find out if they work. So to debug, I'm going to say, I'm going to console.log users, because I want to know if I'm storing the thing correctly. Okay, so here I run nodemon. Nodemon is the node. Nodemon is a package which is very, very cool, because it allows us to, did I write something about that? No, I should. Nodemon is this binary package which allows you to say nodemon index.js, and anytime you make a change in the application, it reloads and restarts the application automatically. It's very, very cool, because sometimes Node crashes, right? Not because it's bad as a programming environment, but because it's by design. So if there is a fatal error, you get a crash unless you do exception handling, and you know, things happen. But most of the times you will need this to during development. Let's see. So I run this. First, let's hope that it runs the first time without problems. So we have no problems in the program, which is absolutely fantastic. And yes, so I'm going to open also a separate shell here for the client. Front end, okay. Front end, I run npm start, because this is a create React app application. So when this starts, we will get the window in the browser automatically. And here while we are waiting, so here we are going to use the fetch API. Where is that? The fetch API to create the request to register the user. Sorry, I had to. So the application is running on port 3000. Sorry, so I'm going to run npm start, which runs on port 3000. And then what I want to do is I want to run the server on port 3001, for example, or 4000. No, it wasn't this process. So I have another process using Node that is using the port 3000. What is that? I don't care. I'm just going to say ps ax. So this gives us all the processes that are using we are using in our computer. There is something. Okay, this process uses Node, so I just say kill this process ID. So now it should work fine. So the reason why it wasn't this server process causing the problem is because it's not listening on any port. So we are missing a pretty big part of this. So let me go here. Okay, we need to add app.listen, and the port is specified by this number. So I can use 3001 for the server listening on port 3001. Otherwise, the server is not listening at all on any port. So why it's taking so long? It's my computer. It does not have a lot of power, and while I'm recording, it can be very slow. Okay, we got there. Everything's set up. So I go to the activities view. When I press the button, we get the registration form. And when I press login, what I want to do, well, what we do is we run the do login function, which checks for all those values, and finally it should talk to the server, right? So the server, I'm going to start it now. And here below, we are going to use fetch. So fetch, I recommend you to check out the fetch API tutorial I have on my blog, which is very detailed. Fetch is a built-in API provided by the browser. And we are going to call it here using this code. So what this code does is this. So we need to define the URL, const URL equals. So the URL is HTTP, and I use HTTP because I'm localhost, but you should use HTTPS otherwise. Localhost 3001. This is the URL of the server. We also need to specify a set of options. So a set of options for the fetch, and the options set the parameters we're going to send to the server, the method, and how they are encoded. So the options object I introduced you before sets the method. So the HTTP method, which can be get, post, options, and so on. Options delete I don't have memory, sorry. This is why I create a blog, because otherwise I don't remember what I learned. Headers, we define a header which is content type, and the content type is application slash xwww form URL encoded. Basically, it says that the body is encoded like this and not, for example, as JSON. So we send the email and the password. And finally, when we get a response back from the server, we check the response. So response.ok is something internal managed by fetch. So if response is okay, we're going to check the status, which is something we set in the server side by setting the status here. So if we get 404 back, email not found, please retry. 401, email and password do not match, please retry. So I'm going to adjust those things here. So actually, I built this example for a login process, not for a registration process. So right now in registration, I always send 401. So let me just manage that error, please retry. We will add more detailed messages later on. So if there is no error, we are going to return the response to the second then, which now executes this function, which returns the result as JSON. And the final then gets the data, which is a JSON object, and we're going to check the success property we set here in the objects, and if that is true, we are going to add the token to our cookies. And finally, I'm going to navigate to something here I call private area in the example, but we're going to navigate to the add activity, I think. So we can go on with the form. So yeah, so this is the thing I mentioned before. We are storing the token in a cookie, and this is just to start building the application. I want to see if things are working. Later we will store this in an HTTP only cookie, and this will be not needed anymore. We will just store the fact that we are authenticated. Okay, so let me actually remove all this stuff here because we don't need that. Okay, so if we try, we should see how things are badly broken. So I'm going to enter my email, and the password is, I don't know, 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8. Login. Let me open the development console so we can see if there is any error, what that error is. So we got a not found problem, and then we get an unexpected token. So let me see, in the network panel we get this. Okay, cannot post slash, because we define the slash register URL, and here we are calling the root URL, so we need to say slash register. So the application reloads, enter the email again, 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8. Login. There was another error, which is unauthorized. Please enter same value in both the password fields. Oh, right, I'm not sending I'm not sending the password confirmation field, which then I check server side to see if it matches the password. Let me see, password confirmation. Okay, so let me go back to the server and I use the password development because I can just copy and paste it. Now I log in. Whoa, something seems to work. So let me see. Yes, we get the new object store into the database with the hashed password here. And then well, let me see if we get the cookie. We can go and have a party. We get the token cookie. Perfect. So the token cookie is this one. Well, I think, let me see. Yeah, I use the token cookie, which is this one. So I also use these things to test my for the tutorial. Let me see if I now remove the token and then I go back to the activities list and I retry the process by calling so here okay, I press login. There should be a new cookie here because I'm retrying because I don't know if I had the cookie already in there when I was testing another application on localhost port 3000. So cookies are stored per origin, and so if you change the port, the domain, or the protocol, you're going to see another set of cookies. So now if I press login, I should see the token cookie. Let me try. The token cookie is there. This is another thing, I think it's for the map. The token cookie is there. Perfect. And we have another user here. So we now have 2 users with the same email, which is something I don't want to have. And yeah, but I think we've done a lot of things in this video and it's already too long for today. So I'm going to add this into Trello and then we will go on in the next video. We are authenticated and then we can do the GraphQL part. So see you in the next video.